Welcome back to the channel. This will be the best wildcard team for Game Week 8. You can see the clean sheet odds on screen, and Manchester City are top, facing Everton at home with a 48% probability of keeping a clean sheet. Arsenal are in second, facing Fulham away. Sunderland are third against Wolves at home. Leeds have Burnley away, and they're favoured in that matchup. Liverpool are fifth, facing Man United at home, and Tottenham Hotspur complete the top six, facing Aston Villa, also a home match. In last place is Man United against Liverpool away with a 13% probability, but ultimately this will be covered in the deadline stream on Saturday. The same goes for the top 10 captaincy options, which I talked about in my team selection video, and there is a transfer tips where I highlight 11 players to buy, hold, sell and skip, and also a differential to add to the watch list. If you want to see a predicted lineups podcast tomorrow, then let me know down in the comment section below. And like this video, let's get it to over 200 on YouTube, and also subscribe to the channel. We are closing in on 37,000 overall. Check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, fair likes to my videos, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. Leave a 5-star review on Spotify, hit the notification bell on YouTube to stay up to date with my FPL and use your fantasy content. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. My squad value is 100.5 million, and I've also got 0.7 in the bank, so it would be 101.2 million overall. The spending power is significantly less though, and you can see what your spending power is using a website like FPL.team, which I'll be using later on to visualize this starting 11, talk about Game Week 9 as well, and highlight the captaincy. But let's start off with the two goalkeepers, and I have been fairly consistent with my choices between the sticks, but when it comes to your main goalkeeper, I think there are two that particularly stand out over the rest of the competition. David Raya is the joint most expensive goalkeeper in the game alongside Gianluigi Donnarumma at 5.7 million, and he's also the fourth highest scoring goalkeeper in the game, and Arsenal are top of the FDR, the fixture difficulty rating, up until Game Week 12, so doubling up on that Arsenal defence is viable, and my preference is to have Raya and then one Arsenal defender, which I'll talk about very soon. Jurrien Timber was highlighted in my transfer tips, and I've personally got an Arsenal defender already, and it's between those two to complement that sort of Arsenal triple up, which I would recommend over the next 5 game weeks. The other goalkeeper that I think is of interest is Nick Pope, who is currently the top scoring goalkeeper in Fantasy Premier League, and Newcastle have only conceded goals to Arsenal, Liverpool and Barcelona this season. They are keeping multiple clean sheets across all competitions. They're looking very solid defensively, and I'd highly recommend having a Newcastle defender and or Nick Pope in goal, because they're the only other team I'd consider a defensive double up at this moment in time, even though their fixtures pale in comparison to Arsenal, and you'd probably expect them to keep fewer clean sheets over the course of the season. But the backup is Dubravka. He's the template goalkeeper in FPL, and he's also one of the most template picks in the game across all positions, so I think he's the best 4 million option in the long run. We could see Lucas Perry return fairly soon, so Darlow will no longer be that other 4 million goalkeeper to look at. You've got Roofs at around 4.6. He has been brilliant for Sunderland so far this season, but you don't need to spend that much money in this position, and if you go for such an expensive goalkeeper like David Raya, having that 4 million backup in Dubravka is more than enough. He's also got some promising fixtures on the horizon, like Wolves away in Game Week 9, and of course Leeds at home in Game Week 8. But let's now go to the defensive line, build one defensive double up, and then I think provide a bit of variety and balance to this position. Let's get the cheap defender out of the way first in Mukiele. Alderete is currently in injury doubt. He was subbed off with Paraguay a couple of days ago, so we'll see if he's available against Wolves at home. And if you do have an extra 0.1 million in the bank, you can go for Alderete instead. There's also Rodon and Goodmanson to cover Leeds defensively, and I wouldn't be going for a Burnley defender with Dubravka in goal and doubling up on the Clarets defensively. So I think Mukiele is a solid choice. He can score DEFCON on a regular basis, but if Alderete is available, I'd have a slight preference for him, even though there's not a big difference in the grand scheme of things. I'd also recommend that Newcastle defender, and Dan Burn is one of the top options there. But the same goes for Trippier, who will be a great option for the next 6 to 8 weeks, whilst Tino Livramento is out injured. And if you don't go for Nick Pope in goal, I would highly recommend one of Burn or Trippier in this defensive line. The same goes for an Arsenal option like Jurrien Timber. Even the likes of Calafiori and Saliba are decent, but Gabriel remains my favourite option at 6.3 million now. But if you already had him in your team, that is a massive advantage, and I see no reason to selling him on the wild card. He's arguably the best defender in FPL right now, even though Jurrien Timber has an extra point on the board. The main issue I have with during Timber is rotation. If Ben White stays available, we saw in the Champions League for match day 2, he got the start against Olympiacos, and heading into those matches against Olympiacos and West Ham, I was talking about Timber being benched in one of them, and this could translate to the Premier League at some stage. I look at fixtures like Burnley away in a couple of weeks' time, and that's where Timber could be given the rest in this competition. Now, Gabriel could also be given the odd rest here and there, especially if Hincapié is available, and reports indicate he will be ready in the Arsenal squad after the international break. So with Gabriel, I don't think he's immune to rotation, but it's less likely in his position, and he's going to start the vast majority of games in the Premier League. He's also got the most goal threat, despite the fact that Timber has 2 goals and 2 fantasy assists so far in this Premier League campaign. But Timber's on 48 points, Gabriel's on 47, and in joint third is Marcus Senesi with 46, tied with Mark Gay, who's another great option to consider for this defensive line. And I would highly recommend a Crystal Palace defensive asset like Mark Gay, Richards, or Lacroix, and I still like Mitchell, and Daniel Munoz is the most exciting, but also the most expensive at 5.5 million. Dean Henderson is a decent goalkeeper to go for, but Raya and Pope would be my preference as your main choice, and Dubravka, of course, is the backup. But Marcus Senesi is a DEFCON machine. If he had stayed on the pitch against Fulham for the full 90 minutes, I believe he would have secured DEFCON, and he would be the only defender to have featured in all 7 Premier League games so far and get DEFCON points in every single one of them. But it's still 6 out of 7, a great success rate, and ultimately he's a much better FPL asset than any of us thought going into pre-season. But the final defender is from Crystal Palace. He's another DEFCON machine, maybe not to the same level as Marcus Senesi, but Chris Richards has 33 FPL points so far. He won't get too many goals or assists, especially in comparison to Mark Gay and Daniel Munoz, but he's still going to be a solid choice, and he's very under the radar and a massive differential at 4.5 million, and he's also got very low ownership at less than 5%. So I think Chris Richards is a great option here if you want to have a few differential players across your 15-man squad, and you don't need to always force in differentials per se, but going for Richards over Gay saves you plenty of money, and he also offers better value in the process. So this is the defensive line. You're covering Newcastle, Arsenal, Bournemouth and Crystal Palace defensively, with backups from Burnley and Sunderland here when you also factor in the goalkeepers. But let's now move on to the midfielders, where things are definitely shaping up and we see a template forming in this position as well. Moises Caicedo is one of the most transferred in players heading into Game Week 8. His ownership is now 15%. He costs 5.8 million. He's a DEFCON machine, but it has dried up a little bit in recent matches, and it has been covered up by the goals he is scoring, and some of them are of top quality, like the ones against Brentford and Liverpool. But Caicedo is still a great way of covering that Chelsea midfield, and if Enzo Fernandez is available, I'd also highly recommend him, especially for those with the budget. Would I pick Enzo Fernandez or Caicedo if both of them are fit? I think Caicedo will offer you a baseline score of 4 to 5 points in most matches, which I do like. He's also cheaper, but in terms of the attacking potential and the higher ceiling, I still think Enzo Fernandez takes the cake there, and if he's fit for Game Week 8, I'd probably lean towards him, but it also depends on your budget and what compromises you have to make to fund Enzo Fernandez in the midfield. So we'll wait and see if the Argentine is available, and right now I'm going for Moises Caicedo because I've got other more expensive midfielders in this position. Caicedo's actually the cheapest of the lot, but next up I'm going to go for Ndai, who costs 6.5 million, facing Man City away. Everton's fixtures aren't particularly great, but he's on penalties, fairly fixture proof, and he's not getting too many assists, but Ndai is a good goal scorer at this price tag. I've had him since Game Week 1 and I'm fairly happy with him. Only 2 midfielders have been consistent for me. Antoine Semenyo is one of them and Ndai is the other. Now, he might not be a differential any longer, but going into Game Week 7, he had around 5 to 8% ownership, and I talked about purchasing him over Victor Gyökeres to cover the Arsenal attack, and Bukayo Saka will now be the flavour of the month or the week because he's on penalties, it seems. I did discuss this after he took that penalty against West Ham. There's also a bit of context to apply because it was his 200th Premier League appearance and he secured his 100th goal contribution in this competition. Both Saka and Ndai have similar ownership at around 10%, and I think they can still provide massive gains right now, but more people will buy Saka over the coming weeks, so you would still be fairly early to the party if you bring him in against Fulham away. My clearest route to get to him is by selling Bruno Fernandes, but I still need to sell somebody else like Pedro Porro to Senesi, which is all covered in my team selection video. I still like Victor Gyökeres up front. There are reports of Kai Havertz returning very soon and ahead of schedule, but Saka is my favourite Arsenal attacker right now with multiple avenues to points. It looks like the penalties could be shared between him, Odegaard once he's back in November, and Victor Gyökeres, but the Swede should still be first choice when it comes to those penalties. He is one of the best penalty takers in Europe after all, and with Saka, you always have a bit of a doubt in the back of your mind that he could miss a penalty, even though his general record is very solid. But next up is a template pick of Antoine Semenyo. So you do have two relative differentials in Ndiaye and Saka to compensate for this template pick. I know the argument for some people that went without Semenyo for all this time is to kind of just go without him now and the returns will dry up. He has overperformed in many of these matches, but I still think he's the most consistent option. He's fixture proof and he's a talismanic figure. He's gone up to another level this season because I think in the previous campaign, he would score or assist against the biggest and best teams in the country and then be left wanting against the so-called weaker opposition and in the appealing fixtures, which made him a very frustrating FPL asset. You sometimes benched him on the wrong occasion pretty much, but with Antoine Semenyo right now, you always start him and you could even consider him for the captaincy, even in fixtures like Crystal Palace away, but ultimately you have better options in this 15-man squad. And the last midfielder is from that same match, in Ismail Assar. I've been very bullish on him since the beginning of this season. I bought him in Gameweek 3, got the goal against Aston Villa, and then he picked up that injury towards the end of the game, and that's why I had to sell him. Otherwise, he would still be in my FPL team right now at 6.5 million. He's also my favourite Crystal Palace attacker and asset overall, even over Jean-Philippe Mateta, who is another underperformer so far this season. But I like the balance of this midfield. You've got different price points, so you can also balance things out a little bit and also make transfers to other players like Cole Palmer once he's back in November to December, and maybe Saka would be the kind of cash cow to make that happen. And you've also got space and enough funds for some big hitters up front. It is a close call up front, and there are 5 forwards that really stand out over the rest of the pack. That includes Joao Pedro, Nick Voltemada, Erling Haaland, Jarrod Bowen, and Victor Gyökeres, who is discounted right now because we've tripled up on Arsenal already with Raya, Gabriel, and Saka. But Joao Pedro is a template pick still with over 60% ownership, yet Chelsea's fixtures are brilliant, and I would recommend 1 or 2 of their assets overall. That includes Chalobah at the back and Marc Cucurella if you want to go there. I'm not too keen on Robert Sanchez, who is currently in my own FPL squad, but Joao Pedro is still one of the best forwards in Fantasy Premier League, despite blanking in 3 consecutive games. He faces a struggling Nottingham Forest side, and if Ange Postecoglou is still in charge, I would fancy Chelsea to win comprehensively at the City ground. But next up is the best option of them all in Erling Haaland. I'd highly recommend him right now, even though Man City are near the bottom of the FDR for the next 5 game weeks. After Everton at home, there are some tricky tests in there like Liverpool and Aston Villa, but Erling Haaland is fixture proof. He showed that against Arsenal. He is the only player this season to score against the Gunners from open play, and I think Erling Haaland, his records speak for themselves for both club and country. More goals than games played for Norway and in the Champions League, and even in this competition he is averaging a goal per game, and this season it's 9 goals in 7 appearances. So Erling Haaland is by far the standout. I would recommend him over Mohamed Salah, but for those that still have the Egyptian, I would not be selling him this week against Man United, which I discussed in my previous podcast. He might even rival Haaland for the captaincy this week, but going forwards, I think Haaland is the clear standout in many of these game weeks, even though there are some opportunities to go against him, like in Gameweek 9 when Man City face Aston Villa away. But the last forward and player of this 15-man squad is Nick Voltemada, who is still a differential, and he costs 7.2 million overall, and he's been a brilliant acquisition for Newcastle so far. And over the international break, he scored the winner against Northern Ireland, so he's in great form at the moment, and I would recommend him as part of this setup. But if you have enough money, you might even consider Jarrod Bowen. It does say that I'm 0.6 million over budget, but that's for someone who has just started and has no value tied up in some of these players, but I do have that sort of capability and resources, which I'll show you using the website FPL.team. I would highly recommend that you check it out, because for future planning and visualizing things, it is unbeatable when it comes to FPL. Between the sticks, I will start David Raya over Dubravka, even though some people watching might feel like in a fixture like Fulham away, you want to diversify your defensive line and not double up or triple up on the Arsenal defence. So going for Dubravka over the next 2 game weeks of Raya is a viable option, but not something I'd necessarily recommend, despite Burnley having some promising fixtures like Leeds at home. In this defensive line, there's Mukiele against Wolves at home, and remember, with 0.1 million in the bank, you could go for Alderete, and some people watching will have even more funds at the disposal. Senesi's a DEFCON machine, so even facing a decent Crystal Palace side, I still think Senesi can produce points in one way, shape or form. He's got goals and assist potential for a centre-back, and also the bonus points, which he has accrued on multiple occasions so far this season. The same applies to Gabriel, who has the best chance of a clean sheet of any of these defenders, and only Man City are ranked higher in terms of clean sheets than Arsenal this week. Ismail Sarr is facing Bournemouth at home, so you've got a bit of a clash there, but ultimately Sarr and Senesi could haul in the same game or produce something around 3 to 4 points. Caicedo and Joao Pedro are facing Nottingham Forest away, and there's a double up in Bournemouth, of course, with Antoine Semenyo. They are the most template picks, but I also think they're by far the best options that the Cherries have to offer. If you want to go differential with this team, you might want to consider Justin Kluivert, as I talked about in my Transstits podcast, but I would probably wait first until he gets more minutes and starts before investing, and Bukayo Saka facing Fulham away is another great option and leading captaincy contender in the midfield, with Nick Voltemada facing Brighton away, Erling Haaland at home to Everton. He takes the armband once more. For those with Mohamed Salah, you could consider him for the captaincy despite the poor form. His underlying stats also pale in comparison to Erling Haaland, but his record against Man United is phenomenal. And on the bench there's Ndiaye, who has 1 goal and 2 appearances against Man City, and it was at the Etihad, where he will play this weekend. Dan Burn is facing Brighton away. I'm happy to keep him on the bench. The same goes for Chris Richards, so that could actually be a decent bench boost, to be quite honest with you. And in Gameweek 9, that could be the play for those wildcarding in Gameweek 8. So you can have something like this with Dubravka, Sarr, Mukiele and Richards. It's not the prettiest bench, of course, and some of those fixtures aren't great. Ideally, of course, it would be a bench boost in 8, but you can't use 2 chips at the same time. But you could start Raya and Gabriel facing Crystal Palace at home, and of course with Saka, that completes the Arsenal triple up. Burn and Voltemada at home to Fulham, Senesi and Semenyo facing Nottingham Forest at home, Joao Pedro and Caicedo against Sunderland at home, Ndiaye against Tottenham is decent, and Erling Haaland facing Aston Villa away is still the best captaincy option on paper from these players, but you could go a little bit different, and if Ange Postecoglou is still in charge by Gameweek 9, I think Antoine Semenyo might be even better when it comes to the captaincy. The expected points is also 60.1, and if we look at Gameweek 8, it is 53, which is significantly lower, but yeah, we've got some promising players on the bench as well, which doesn't help things too much. And if we look at what FPL Team suggests, they might recommend a few changes here and there. They actually rank Chris Richards very highly, even over Marcus Senesi, and it all depends on how you kind of predict these matches. Maybe you fancy a Crystal Palace win over Bournemouth, but that'll be very difficult to predict for the upcoming deadline. I will provide predictions, of course, in the deadline stream, and if you want to see that Predicted Lineups podcast, then you can also see my scoreline predictions there, and also all 20 Premier League teams with their probable lineups and the upcoming fixtures highlighted going into the Gameweek 8 deadline. But the last thing I want to show you is a few differentials or changes you could make, like Jarrod Bowen for Nick Voltemada, and then to fund that sort of move, you can get Minter instead of Ndiaye, and I've also got 0.1 million in the bank. Instead of Mukiele, we can go for Alderete or a cheap Leeds defender like Goodmanson or Rodon, and they all cost at around 4 to 4.1 million, so that's something else you could entertain. And for some people, you want to go even more differential, so instead of Joao Pedro, we just have Nick Voltemada in there from the beginning, and don't discount Victor Gyökeres. He is still a good option, but I would rather have Bukayo Saka in the long run, not even because of the penalties, just the multiple avenues to points, and he'll be a bit more nailed on in the long term. I think with Gyökeres, you could see reduced minutes when Kai Havertz is available once more, but with all Arsenal players, there will be a bit of rotation this season. Arteta is using his squad very well up until now, and I don't think anybody is necessarily safe, but some players like Gabriel and Raya will be safer than others, that's for sure. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Which changes would you recommend to this FPL wildcard, and are there any other players I haven't talked about throughout this video? Be sure to drop a like, subscribe to my channel, and also the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Let's get this video to over 200 likes, and let's keep on pushing towards new goals like 37 for our subscribers. Follow me on X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, for likes to my videos, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Saturday for the next deadline stream, and there could be a reaction stream over the weekend.